I don't think I really understood what the word adopted meant. So she used to tell me that I was apparently when I was a baby, they took a carry cot out into the garden and I fell into it from the sky. Like I was like a fairy who fell into it. And as I grew up, I understood what it meant in school because I googled what it meant as well. And so then I got a grasp about what exactly adoption was. And I was okay with it because if I was a fairy to my mother, it means that I was something very special.
Tell your child that they are adopted from as early an age as they can understand. And hiding that presumes that they will never find out. Imagine what happens to the trust between a parent and a child if a child finds out, as an adult at the age of 30, at the age of 40, that they were adopted and lied to.
Are adopted kids more likely to go through mental health issues, perhaps depression, anxiety?
Yes, the statistics do certainly say that they are more likely to go through depression and anxiety and self-identity issues and, forming good attachment in their relationships. But, all of that is overcomable.
This is Zen-Brain, where we have conversations that you normally wouldn't see on mainstream media. Personal conversations with experts or research done in the area of cognitive neuroscience, conversations around the science of stress and how that affects our brain, how grief affects us and its impact on our mental, emotional, and physical health, or trauma, even how serious illnesses like cancer affects entire families. We also have conversations around mental health issues like depression, anxiety, OCD, and other disorders. And on the other spectrum, relationship dynamics and how to become more self-aware. So do check out zenbrain.com, and if you click on the YouTube icon, you will be taken directly to our YouTube channel where you'll find over 100 videos. And you can also listen to our podcasts on Spotify. Now, today we focus on adopted kids and mental health. And we are bringing some challenges and concern that adopted kids have or parents of adopted kids go through. And remember, one size does not fit all. So please do seek professional help if you need it. These conversations are not in any way a replacement for professional help. Remember that, please. These are free-flowing conversations. And this topic of adopted children and mental health came up after an email we got some time ago from a 23-year-old boy working in an IT company in Bangalore, who started with the fact that he was very happy with his family and had no reason to complain, as they loved him, perhaps even more than his biological parents would have. And even if he'd lost his father, his mother doted on him, and he feels like he was meant to take care of her. However, in his email, he says, and I quote, "I feel very privileged to have been adopted and grateful, but over the years, I have been feeling a deep sense of sadness and a vacuum that I cannot explain. Everything is fine, and yet it seems very stifling. I cannot explain it." And in his email, he also talks about, and I quote, "the sadness or deep loneliness and bleakness. Could it be mental illness?" he asks. "How can I check if I'm prone to mental illness like schizophrenia or worse?" And he adds, "I want to see a therapist or counselor, but then I don't want to upset my mother because if she gets to know, she would be heartbroken that I even feel this way. I feel so trapped." He's requested his name be withheld. But to help us understand better, we are now joined by psychologist Dr. Sonya Mehta. Thank you for joining us all the way from California. Let's really begin by answering this boy's questions. Let's start with the first one. He seems quite happy with his adoptive family, Doc. But how do you explain this deep sense of sadness and this vacuum that he talks about? Is this common among adopted kids?
Yes. In fact, it is something that almost seems to be an artifact of adoption. Children at various ages, adults, do talk about what we perhaps club together as an adopted child syndrome. And It's characterized by these feelings of abandonment, depression, a lot of questioning, seeking answers which perhaps are not available, issues of self-identity. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why did my parents give me up? And the hard, I guess, thing to accept is that some of these questions don't really have available answers. And that, in some ways, almost feeds into this syndrome, because you're searching and you know that the odds of getting some of these responses, some of the truths, as it were, may be impossible.
Mhm.
So what he's talking about, this feeling of a vacuum, of an emptiness, is sadly not uncommon.
Another similar question, which is anonymous parent of an 18-year-old adopted girl has sent in. The girl was adopted when she was 15 days old from an orphanage in New Delhi. Now, she knows she's been adopted from the very beginning and often talks about a feeling like there's a hole in her heart. What can her parents do to fix this?
First of all, there's no fixing this. It's a journey. And in some ways, I think, and I'd like to talk about that too, adoptive parents have a tough time. And almost sometimes feel guilty for their child's pain, even though they have done everything to be a good parent to the child that they have taken into their family. I think part of what one can do is, as a parent, to realize that this is not a one-off. This is a long lifetime conversation to have. One of the things that I would say is, let your child set the pace. Let her direct the questions. Let her decide what is appropriate when she feels the need to know. And I'd also like to say that it is so critical that you be honest. If you don't have the answer, if you don't know, let's say, why the child was given up or where the child was given up, you've got to be able to say that. Lying to a child who's been adopted is probably one of the biggest mistakes that adoptive parents make. And the sad thing is that they do it out of love and wanting to protect their child. But you're feeding into an adopted child's fears when you lie to them. Eventually, these things do come out, and then the betrayal is almost exaggerated, both. So yes, be truthful. Tell them what you know and what you don't know. The other, I think, really critically important thing for parents to keep stressing is that this is permanent. You are part of our family, for better or worse, come what may. And children often will act out, especially when they're young, to push the boundaries, to test the limits. If I'm really naughty, badly behaved, aggressive, all of which one does see, will my adoptive parents give me back? Will I no longer be part of this family? And I think that is a critical message to keep repeating. This is it. We're in this together, and we're in this forever. And I am here to help you find answers, though I may not have the answers.
Doc, I'd like to ask you very specifically, whatever the age of the child when they come into an adoptive parent's house, the child does go through some sort of trauma, right? And I think it's important for us to understand what this trauma is like, even if they are too little to understand.
So, of course, it's hard for one to be able to know what an infant goes through, but there's a lot of theorizing about the pain of separation from the birth mother. There are a lot of psychologists who say that that breakdown in the attachment process characterizes a child's development. However, I'm not sure that I entirely believe that. I think how it is handled and the age at which a child is adopted make a big difference in how an adopted child develops a sense of identity. Obviously, the younger the child, the easier it is because the child has no memory of a foster home, an orphanage, a birth mother. But even in the cases when, a child does have all of those memories, and you deal with it differently, it's critical to, from day one, and there's a lot of research now on this, that from day one, you make the adoption, the fact that the child is adopted, part of the normal family culture and ethos. So you talk about it, obviously, in different terms and different language, depending on the age of the child, but you talk about it. It is not something that you shy away from or are frightened of, because children interpret these cues and you don't lie about it. And I think that more and more parents are being counseled in the right way, that, this is not something that you are embarrassed about or protecting the child from. You tell the child from day one that you were brought into this family, that you are part of us because we want you and we love you. Mm. Children often have a lot of questions about why they were given up. And those can be really hard for both the child and the parent to hear and talk about. And sometimes you just don't know, right, why a child was given up. It's important to say that, not to denigrate, not to say, oh, your parents were poor, or maybe your parents, were not married. Never put down the birth parent, because that is also a part of your child's identity. And that's not going away. Share what you know, make it age appropriate, make it as truthful as you can be, talk about it often, normalize it.
So the eternal nature versus nurture debate, the jury is out on that. But in most cases, would you say that nurture always wins?
I get a Nobel Prize for having solved that debate. The jury's still out on that. But I will say nurture is critical. You can't change perhaps what physical characteristics, what genes the child is born with. But we know today that genotype is not necessarily expressed in the same way in different environments. So the more loving, the more nurturing, the more caring an environment is, the more the child is going to flourish, and it doesn't matter what genes the child was born with.
I'm getting back to something you brought up, which is one of the main concerns of new adoptive parents is about whether they should tell their child. I mean, we are still stuck at a time where we are wondering whether to tell the child, right? There are cases like that. Now, what is the best way to break it, and at what age is it appropriate? Now, I'm bringing this up specifically because I've had a chat with a friend of mine who's very conflicted currently about telling her daughter that she's adopted. She personally wants to, but her husband and that side of the family don't want her to ever know this. I mean, Doc, we would love to hear your point of view on this. Is there a right way to do this?
This is one thing that I can definitively answer. And that is that research, and this is not my opinion or somebody else's opinion. This is research. This is scientific investigation. Tell your child that they are adopted from as early an age as they can understand. And hiding that presumes that they will never find out. That is a huge burden to place on yourself as well as your child. Imagine what happens to the trust between a parent and a child if a child finds out, as an adult at the age of 30, at the age of 40, that they were adopted and lied to from day one. Because every child asks questions like, was I in your tummy? Show me a picture of when I was a baby. Do I look like Nani? Each one, when you say one lie begets 1,000. So I can't imagine, or I can't think of any really good reason to not tell a child that they were adopted. You owe the child the truth.
What if there is a conflict within the family and perhaps the father's side does not want to reveal this information to her? They want to protect her. But like you said, one lie begets 1,000 others. So
what are you protecting the child from? You are presuming that a child will not be able to process this information. And yes, it's going to be hard. No child wants to, and I don't know the age of the child you're referring to.
The child is 7.
They should have been saying this already. It's already a little late. But I think it's equally important to address that everybody in the family needs to be on the same page and discuss, maybe have a professional involved in the discussion, maybe have another parent who has adopted a child be part of that discussion to say, why is it that you want to withhold this information from the child? What is it that you are afraid of? Do you think that the child will not be able to handle this information? Are you afraid that the child will not love you in the same way? What is it that you are concerned about? And address those concerns. And then it's really important to have a united front. The child cannot be hearing different messages from different parts of the family. It's confusing and hard and heartbreaking enough for a child to process this. It can't be that different people in a family are giving a 7-year-old different messages. It's incumbent on the adults to be adult and figure it out.
I'm sure she's going to be watching this and listening to what you have to say. So, you made a good point of perhaps, if you're not being able to do it yourself, then maybe involve a professional in the process. And I think there are lots of them around now. Getting back to the email, I want to just finish off some of the questions that this boy has asked us specifically. Now, he's talks about
23, you said, right?
Yes, 23.
Okay.
He's 23. And this is his second question. Now, he talks about sadness or deep loneliness and bleakness for a long time, sometimes weeks or months. He asks a very pointed question. Could it be mental illness? How can I check if I'm prone to mental illnesses like schizophrenia or other mental disorders?
How can anyone check if they are prone is a question that any one of us can ask. And unless, you actually have a grandparent who has dementia or is schizophrenic, none of us have those answers, right? So I would say, don't worry about whether you are prone to this. But I would also say that if you are dealing with feelings of sadness and despair and depression, you need to see someone. You need to consult a counselor, a therapist. Start with your family doctor if there is no other easy path forward. Another really great resource is to talk with other children of adoption, because you realize you're not alone in this, that this is a journey that other people have gone through as well. And sometimes that can be the most helpful and the most healing, to realize that this is something that a lot of children who've been in the same situation have experienced and have worked through, and learn that you're not alone.
Are adopted kids more likely to go through mental health issues, perhaps depression, anxiety?
I'm not liking what I have to say, so that's why I'm sort of hesitating, which is that, yes, the statistics do certainly say that they are more likely to go through depression and anxiety and self-identity issues, and forming good attachment in their relationships. But all of that is overcomable with really loving parents and family support and friends and good professional help. I think, especially in India, we tend to look at adopted children as somehow less than or stigmatized in some way. A child is a child, and a child is shaped by its experiences and the love and the care that it receives. I always say that there is the family that we are born into, and there is the family we choose. And I think that the family we choose is far more meaningful and impactful than the family that we are just born into. So while there seems to be a greater incidence of struggles with mental health, I don't think that that's something that cannot be overcome or worked with, or if dealt with well from the very beginning, something that you have to accept as inevitable.
Perhaps the struggles with mental health may be a little more than so-called biological children. But like you said, these are overcomable, and it's part of the process, really. I think what is also very important, Doc, wouldn't you say, is that parents don't take this personally as something that they are responsible for and feel guilty about. It is part of the process of adoption.
It is part of the process of children growing up, right? And let me go back to what was said, because I want to qualify it a little bit. When we break things down to numbers, right? Sometimes we attribute more meaning to it than there has to be. Yes, firstborns are more likely to have depression and anxiety. Does that mean every firstborn goes through it? Children of alcoholics are more likely to be alcoholic. Does it mean that every child of an alcoholic goes through? When you start breaking things down into these categories, at some point, it ceases to hold meaning. You have agency. You have agency over your life.
Well put. And that is something we should never forget. You have control, you have agency. You can choose to keep thinking about what your life could have been, or focus on the life that you have. And just, Doc, one more point to make. All the adopted kids that I know of are extremely spoiled. They are perhaps valued much more than biological kids. I just want to make this point.
Maybe parents who have struggled to have a baby and have suddenly been able to complete their family appreciate the experience more. But again, we're making such big generalizations. The other important thing I would say is, don't go down a tunnel. Reach out for help, support, talk to people, talk to your parents, talk to your friends, find an internet group that talks about this if you're not ready to talk about this personally. There are lots of resources out there. You should not feel alone, because you aren't alone. You really are not alone. There are millions of children who are thriving adults and were at one time part of another biological family.
Doc, one last thing that this boy who's 23 asks, I want to see a therapist or counselor, but then I don't want to upset my mother, because if she gets to know, she would be heartbroken that I even feel this way. I feel so trapped.
I would say that you absolutely should see somebody, the reason that you are seeing a counselor does not necessarily have to be shared with mother if she's unable to process and deal with this. To say that you are figuring things out, that you are working through, your life goals, that you are dealing with personal issues of growth that you want to talk to a psychologist, or you don't have to. I'm not a believer in truth for the sake of truth. And if his mother is going to feel guilty or hurt or upset by this, then why subject her to that? But at the same time, get the help you need.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we move on to many other questions, here is Ahona's perspective. Ahona was adopted 5 days after her birth and was told from the beginning that she was adopted. She's now all grown up and a budding lawyer. Here she is.
My mom told me when I was quite young, about 4 or 5, and she told me in a very casual way, and I don't think I really understood what the word adopted meant. So she used to tell me that I was apparently when I was a baby, they took a carry cot out into the garden and I fell into it from the sky. Like I was like a fairy who fell into it. And as I grew up, I understood what it meant in school because I googled what it meant as well because internet was coming up. And so then I got a grasp about what exactly adoption was, and I was okay with it because if I was a fairy to my mother, it means that I was something very special. I had a friend, I told her once when she came over that I'm adopted, and I don't really think even she understood what it meant. She must have also googled it. So in school there was a topic about biological babies and how babies come in a very young manner. We were being explained, and I told them ki okay, I am adopted. And my friend who didn't believe it in the beginning said no, she's lying. She told me also she's lying, she's not adopted, she looks exactly like auntie, she behaves like auntie, look, she's so spoiled, she has so many toys at home, she can't be adopted. I was like, so what? I am adopted and I'm spoiled as hell. So, like, I am loved by my mother. My mother will give me whatever I want. So, that doesn't determine if I'm adopted or I'm not adopted. I am spoiled. Not when I was young. As I grew up, I became curious in the sense that, okay, maybe I'm not a Bengali, maybe I'm South Indian, because whenever I go, people ask, are you from the South? Because of my complexion or because of my hair or whatever. And I'm like, no, I'm from Bengal. And they're like, oh, okay. So what if I was from South? What if I was not only from South? What if I was from some other place? So that kind of a question does come up in my mind. But it doesn't matter where you are from, it is where you are now. I could be a single child, I could be from a family of 7 daughters, but I do think that it is better that whoever I was born to gave me up for adoption than killing me as infanticide or in infanticide. And I feel that is really important to realize that if I was not given up for adoption, I could have had a worse life. Am I happy in my surroundings? Yes. Am I happy where I live? Yes. Would I have done better? I don't know, and I don't care because I'm quite happy. I go to school, I've been to college, I'm well educated. My mom and I, we talk a lot. We talk about everything under the sun. If I have a question, I will go ask. Then she will scream at me. I don't care. If she wants to scream, she can scream. If I have a question, I know that I can ask my mother. She will tell me. If she feels bad, she'll also tell me that. If I'm thinking more than I should, she'll also say, you know what, stop. There is logic to everything. Apply the logic. And when she gives me a logical answer or even an emotional answer, I try to imbibe it. It makes sense to me. I'm okay with it. Okay, so when I was really young, at the age of 4, I got asthma, and I was too young to understand what. And all I remember was I used to be nebulized constantly at home, before going to school, after coming back from school, And in school, because of the nebulization, I used to feel very sleepy. So I used to sleep off on the desk between lectures. So once our teacher screamed at me, and then she called mom. And mom protected me and said, look, she is an asthmatic child, so this is why she's sleeping. So I used to ask her, why do I have asthma? And so she said that it is something that you have from your childhood. And so that kind of a thought made me realize, okay, what if I have other problems? What if asthma is not the only thing? What if eventually I get diabetes, eventually I get something else? And I've asked my mother that what if I get some other medical problems? And she said, what do you want to know? I said, what do you know? She said, I don't know anything, and neither do you. So I've said, what do I do? And she said, if you really want to know, go to a hospital, get yourself checked if you want. Spit into a tube, get blood tests done. Maximum, what will you find out? Something which is like, okay, yeah, you are prone to this, you are prone to that. So what will you do? You will have a healthier lifestyle. If you will cut down on sweets, you will go to the gym every day. So those are things you should do on a regular basis. Maximum, you can have a healthier lifestyle. If something is bound to happen, it will happen. And if when it happens, then we'll tackle it as and when it comes. You had asthma, you had no idea, we've tackled it, and now my asthma has gone down. It was childhood asthma. We tackled it. In terms of the idea of adoption, no, I've never. My mom has never made me feel in a negative way regarding where I've come from. Sure, I felt sad about studies. I have felt depressed that I'm not doing well. I felt sad when my dad passed away. But other than that, anything related to where I come from, my inception, my growth, my childhood, nothing. Okay, so I don't have to be constantly in awe of my mother, or she doesn't have to constantly be in awe of me. I am her child. She wanted me, and I'm grateful, sure, but I know for a fact that many couples can't have kids. And for them, the idea of adoption is a huge thing. And nowadays, adoption takes 5-10 years. And if a couple is struggling for 5-10 years to get a child, it means that they desperately want a child as well. So it's like a give and take. I was adopted into a family who really wanted me. So that is one way I think of it. Okay, that is one logical way. Okay, my mother really wanted me. It's not something that she did out of charity. She did it because she really needed a baby, and this was the only way. And she got me, and I'm very spoiled. That is one way that I think of it. Do I want to get to know my biological parents? What would change if I got to know? What if I go and seek, okay, my mother says, okay, these are your biological parents, and I see that they're coming from a slum area. What would I do? Will I go and say, okay, no, you take me back? No, because my mother, who I know as my mother, is my mother who adopted me. What can I do? Maximum I can, if I'm doing well in my life, maximum I can help them out. I can give them a better home. But would that change my relationship with my adoptive mother? No. I would love her as my mother as I know her. She is my mother. That's all I know from my childhood. So that's all I care about. So I wouldn't really put in the effort to get to know my biological parents. If by chance I do get to know, I will try my hardest, I think. But then I won't go and live with them because I don't know them. They're not someone I relate to. It's my mother, I will come back to her. And I've had this conversation with my mother, and we have an understanding. She knows what I've thought, and she's also given me her thoughts. It's a good thing that I have an open dialogue with my mother, and it's also a good thing that whenever I ask her questions, she doesn't take it to heart, because I think she knows that I will have questions, and she answers them to my understanding.
I mean, it's wonderful to hear someone who clearly has had parents who've dealt with it the right way, who had such, what really leapt out at me was the absolute conviction and confidence she had in her parents' support. That it didn't matter what would happen at school, it didn't matter what the friend would say, mom was going to be standing behind me. And, not just adoptive parents, if every parent can do that for their child, this is the result of a parent who really has been there for their kid.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that was really heartening to see. And I'm glad to hear that she's this successful lawyer.
She's a budding lawyer.
Okay.
And I've known her for over 2 decades. And let me assure you, she's one of those, you're right when you say this, Doc, that it applies to all parents. It's not just about adopted children. She's been made to feel so special, so loved. I did not remember her as an adopted child when I was actually talking about this subject. Her mother actually brought it up, and I remembered, oh, yes, she was adopted. So
Yeah.
that's one point of view of talking about everything with her mother, including the one question that I think every adopted child will go through sometime in their lives. Why was I abandoned by my biological mother? So, Doc, what would be the best way to explain this to a young adopted child?
Of course, it depends on what do you know, right? And I think that the kind way to say this is your birth mother. I don't know if there's a father. If there's a father, then say father, your birth parents were not at a stage in their life when they could look after you and give you the life you deserved. And they knew that we were looking for a child to love and to make part of our family who could give you the love and care that you deserve. That's how you became part of our family. I mean, of course, that's what you say to a young child. And these conversations change, right, over the years. And so many young adults spend so much time and effort and money trying to find who their birth parents were. I mean, there's that movie, right? Lion, right? That sort of emotional connection that they crave. And sometimes maybe for some of them it heals something. And then for others, it just creates a whole other set of issues. To go back to your question, what should you tell them? You should tell them what you know. If this was a child that had to be given up because the mother was raped or abused, well, there's really no reason to say that to a young child, to sort of say, well, your mother was very young, or she didn't really know your father. She was not in a place where she could give you a good life, is good enough.
I think many parents opt not to know anything about the biological parents, mostly the mother, really. And it's incredible. Yesterday, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's adopted a child, and she says it's amazing how many times the biological mother comes up, but the biological father is missing in all conversations. So that's another interesting point. But most parents opt now not to know anything about the birth parents or the birth mother. Would you agree?
I think they do that to protect themselves. I guess that's an individual choice.
Mhm.
But, wanting to know something about the health, the, issues that the birth mother has had to deal with. At some point, your child is going to want to know more about this. I mean, it's only natural that the child is going to want to know more about the birth mother.
Mhm.
Shutting the door entirely on that to sort of create this wall that, this was not a person, that this is not the mother of my child, or in no way is protecting you. It's really not in the best interest of your child. But again, that's an individual decision.
Doc, we have a question from Aarti. My question, or something that bothers me often, is if my daughters want to meet their biological mother or family at a later stage, how am I to deal with it then, even if I don't know their background? Should we let them or discourage them? That's number one. The second part of this question is if they are made to feel obligated by any outsider on being adopted, how can I prepare them to face this situation?
If my children want to know or search for their birth mother, should I encourage it? It's human to feel a certain degree of hurt. Okay. And haven't I been enough? And why does my child need to look for this person who gave her up or him up? So I think you have to acknowledge that that's real. But as a parent, you're constantly trying to do what's in the best interest of your child. And if your child feels the need, which the majority of adoptive children do, to search, you're becoming an obstacle in their path is only going to lead to deterioration in your relationship with them. I don't think that you're saying no or saying, I don't want you to do this, is actually going to stop them. You know, it may delay it by a year, it may delay it by 2 years, but a child who wants to do this is going to find a way to do this. I think being part of that process rather than fighting it is important.
Mm-hmm.
So your child trusts you with their feelings through this, because it's hard. It's going to be hard. Whether they find the birth mother and father or not, it's going to be traumatic for the child. And as a parent, you want to be there to support and maintain that trust relationship. So I don't think there's anything to be gained from trying to block that.
And the second part of the question is, if they are made to feel obligated by any outsider on being adopted, how can I prepare them to face this situation?
That's a tough one. And I'm not sure that I have the answer to that, because I can imagine a scenario where someone is trying to take advantage of a different economic or power differential. I don't know that I have the answer, quite honestly, to that. I think, these are the reasons that you stay part of the process, that you can talk it through, that you can discuss how to deal with it, that you can be engaged and not shut out or have this be a secret or something that mama must not know about. It invalidates your relationship. It invalidates the power in your relationship.
Isn't it all about processing? Now, I bring this up because one child apparently fell ill because she wasn't able to fully comprehend and process the information that was coming in, and that her brother was adopted but she wasn't. You are not able to understand as a biological child also that your sibling is adopted. So you become protective, but on the other hand, the dynamics are vital, and it's important for both the children to process something.
I guess I would have to know a lot more, right? Like at what age, what was the child told, how was this introduced? A child falling sick because they've been given implies that this was a shock and sudden information and maybe not handled in the best way possible. If you have a child and you're going to adopt another one, to involve that child from day one in that process is, I can't overstate how important that is. But again, I guess I'd have to know more about the exact circumstances of that to really address it.
It could be the adopted child falling ill due to lack of being able to process things. It could be the sibling, it could be someone else in the family. It's all about being able to process. So this process of processing, how does one do that? And how do you know that they've got it?
So I think it's important to let the child be your guide in this, though that's hard, to make sure that you have mentioned it, maybe to the point where you've had to do it a couple of times, but then let your child be the guide in that. Every child does ask these, it's just the natural development of things, right? Like, oh, what hospital was I born in? Was I in your tummy? Well, how did you, all of these things are natural. And so they will come up. I would not belabor the point to the extent where the child feels like its only identity is, oh, you are the adopted child. It's an important balance to keep the door open, to let the child know that you're open to discussing it and explaining it. But I would really let the child take the lead in that. Children process differently. There are some kids who will sort of just, accept it as, oh, okay, fine, this is the family that loves me and this is where I belong, and not even think about it for a couple of years. And there are other children who won't be able to sleep at night because they're afraid that, they're going to be losing this family as well, or be given away. Or every time a parent says something, they're going to turn around and say, you're only saying that because I'm adopted. So children process very differently. So all I would say is make sure your child knows the facts, and then knows that you're open to a conversation, and then let the child set the pace.
So, Doc, would you say that most adopted children, not all, do go through some abandonment issues? And how can this show up in an adopted child's life as an adult?
The literature says that most children do go through some of this. And it can show up in all kinds of different ways, right? It can be the very rebellious child testing boundaries, acting out, being aggressive. It can be the young adult who has difficulty forming trusting relationships. It can manifest, it's your 23-year-old feeling like, depressed, and that there's something missing. There's some little piece that is missing. So yeah, that separation, the adopted child syndrome, I hate using that term necessarily, can manifest in all kinds of ways, and manifest at all different periods of time in childhood or in adulthood.
When does it become problematic? This whole concept of feeling abandoned, one of the ways to look at it, Doc, is that you unconsciously push away loving relationships because you fear abandonment. Therefore, you take the first step. You push away people who love you. When is it problematic?
It's problematic when it comes in the way of forming meaningful relationships, like you mentioned. My own mother gave me away, so how am I worthy? Which becomes such a part of some children's identity. I would say that when the biggest part of your identity is that you were adopted, that for me is a little bit of a alarm bell. That is the piece that you see as most salient to who you are. That indicates to me that this is an unresolved conflict for you. And again, there are troubled teens, but then we say they're troubled teens. But when there's a troubled teen who has been adopted, we sort of tend to, even as parents or aunts or grandparents, say, oh, is it because that child was adopted? Is there something in that background that leads to this? So I think when it becomes the most important definer of who you are, then that's a real signal that this is a problem. It's so much more than that.
So, Doc, here, this is where I want to bring this up. Especially during puberty or adolescence, right? That's when all these behavioral issues come to the fore. And usually we attribute it to various things. If you're an adopted child, then it must be due to the adoption. If you've lost a parent, it must be due to that, right? So it's almost like, there is something else to pin that or somehow explain away this behavior, right?
Yeah. And when it gets really egregious is when parents say things like, in anger and upset, say things like, you're so ungrateful, you're so selfish, we could have, where you could have. I mean, that is just the worst thing. You're playing into that child's worst fears when you do that. And yet parents are human too, and sometimes lose it. Mm-hmm. But that is like the worst thing you could probably do or say to your child, that they've somehow, you have bestowed this great favor upon them by adopting them.
Well, I'd like to go back to the point that Ahona's made, actually, where she specifies that I was as needed by them as I needed them. So it is not only a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And especially in India, we all know how long the process and tedious it is to actually get a child. So the parents spend months, sometimes years, waiting for this child to come into their lives. And that's why I go back. I think they are valued so much more here. I mean, everywhere around the world, but I feel like whoever I know over here who have been adopted, they're valued so much more. They're loved so much more. But I want to bring up what you just brought out, this, feeling of being obligated. I think a lot of the peripheral relatives do that a lot, like somehow play into that narrative and keep telling them, reminding them how lucky they are. So, how do parents deal with this? How does the child deal with this?
I think the cue has to come from parents, right? Who have to sort of say, that's not okay, and I really think that she said it best. They needed me as much as I needed them, or perhaps more, because I was a baby. What did I know of what I was needed? They needed me to complete their family, to feel like they were part of something more than just the two of them. And I think that parents need to absolutely firmly say, you cannot say that to my child, and I never want you to say that ever again. Mm-hmm. That is a parent's role. A child should not have to ever hear that.
Something that has come up in conversation, which is gaslighting. For all those of us who don't know what it is, it's really undermining what a person is feeling or manipulating what somebody is feeling.
So, gaslighting really means that you almost make a person question their own reality or their own feelings. When people say to you, oh, you've had such a great life. Oh, things are so good. You should not think about the fact that you're adopted. You should only focus on the fact that you have these great parents who've given you X, Y, and Z. Denying anybody's reality is one of the most hurtful things you can do, because you're basically saying that what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're questioning is invalid, is worthless, is not real. And people react to that with either anger or depression or just shutting down. I'd almost rather that they react with anger than shut down. But that tendency does exist. Hey, things are so good now. Why would you worry about who your birth parents are? But that's an integral part of some adopted children's reality. Don't we all want to know where we came from? Don't we all grow up on stories of how, my father went to school, or how my grandfather's friend used to read such and such a book? I mean, our families' histories define us. They're a part of how we define ourselves and integrate our personality. So for an adopted child to have that piece missing is real. And to say that you should just ignore it, get over it, is like telling somebody, okay, you lost a limb, get over it. Or, yeah, sure, you have alopecia, get over it. You have pretty eyes. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Or, you can see, forget about the fact that you are deaf.
Denying anyone's reality is not okay. I'd like to bring in another question here from an anonymous parent of a young adopted girl. And this, I believe, has been happening quite a lot lately. Her need to not be an adopted child. She wants to somehow wish it away and biologically belong to the family.
How old is she?
She is 18.
Well, you can't change biology. And you can't change history, right? And if she's 18, she knows that. And her saying this is coming out probably of a deep desire to belong and an insecurity of how much she does actually belong. I think her parents just have to keep saying, we love you unconditionally. We could not love you more if you were biologically ours or not. And you say that often enough and with enough sincerity. This is a stage. It's not like the 18-year-old thinks that she can change the way things actually have occurred. But it's signaling a really, I guess, a sense of insecurity, a sense of worrying about identity. All you can do is keep reassuring.
But like you said, Doc, that's not all that makes you a human being, a daughter. There's more to you than just being an adopted child. And, I think that's the point that we need to make over and over again. And the fact is that it is self-identity issues are overcomable, in your words, and I will keep repeating this. It's a process. It's not something that will happen overnight. But any last thoughts from you?
I guess I would say that identity is a created concept. And many things go into your sense of identity, your experiences, the labels people give you, especially the labels that get attributed to you as a young child, the relationships you form, the traits that you develop. And, I could go on and on. So identity is a complex interaction of these many things. And identity is also constantly evolving. You are not the same person at 15 that you were at 5 or that you will be at 30. Identity also needs to be nurtured. That nurturance, perhaps, is even more critical for someone who has been adopted and struggles with that. But you claim your own identity. And if part of your identity is that you have 4 parents instead of 2, and you can live with that and incorporate that into part of your life narrative without it being a major source of pain and hurt and questioning. That's really important. There are many resources to get you there. I guess that's what I would want to sort of end with.
And it's important for you to also reach out to perhaps other children who are adopted, other parents who are adoptive parents. And acceptance doesn't happen overnight, and especially when you discover you are adopted. It may not make complete sense, but know this: the adoption process itself is a tedious one. Not only are there thousands and thousands of people waiting, the process itself sometimes takes months and sometimes years. These adoptive parents really did want you. And in my experience, the adopted children I have met are perhaps valued, loved, and dare I say spoiled just a little bit more than biological children, because these are parents that have known what it is to not have a child in their home. So these phases of sadness may always remain, but know that you are wanted, you are loved, because your parents fought to have you there.
Fought to have you there. Yeah. Fought and struggled to have you be part of them. When I was thinking about this, one of the things that I did want us to at least make reference to was the fact that more and more we are going to have children who are adopted by same-sex parents. Maybe that brings an additional level of questioning for the child. And I don't know that has to be part of what we're talking about today. But, somewhere I want to acknowledge that there are parents who are of the same gender who genuinely want to be parents as much as, parents of opposite gender and are as loving.
What are some of the issues that are likely to play in there?
I think that those children have an additional layer have an additional thought process that they have to go through, especially when everybody else in school has one mom and one dad, and I have 2 dads or 2 moms. And that doesn't make sense to children who will accept it. But the parents of those children will go out of their way to stigmatize that. And I think that's actually a whole other show dealing with that issue. But I do want to, since we're talking about adoption, parents of the same gender will, at least one of those has to be an adoptive parent. I do want to at least put out there that those children are as valid, as loved, as much a part of a whole family, deserve the same level of acceptance and dignity that any child does.
That's a good way to close this discussion. Every child deserves a chance, whether you're adopted or not. And, I think what stood out for me in today's discussion is not everything has to revolve around a child's identity as an adopted child. A child is a child. Well, on that note, Doc, thank you very much for giving us such insightful answers.